What if the person you thought you knew had a past so hidden, so full of sacrifice, that it would shatter everything you believed about him? The truth about Robert Langston is one you've never imagined, and it's about to change everything. At Willowbrook Cemetery, mourners stand quietly around Robert Langston's grave. His headstone reads "A Life of Service," a tribute to the man known for his community work. But standing among them is an elderly woman, Clara Johnson, holding a single red rose, her eyes full of sorrow. She's a mystery to the crowd. Who is she, and why does she claim to know Robert better than anyone here? When Clara speaks, the air grows heavy with anticipation. Her words will take them to a past so unexpected, so shocking, that they won't recognize the man they thought they knew. From the streets of Birmingham to the sacrifices he made for justice, Robert's life wasn't what it seemed. And today, Clara is here to reveal the untold truth. The gathering at Willowbrook Cemetery stood solemnly around the freshly dug grave, murmurs carried by the gentle breeze. Friends and acquaintances had come together to honor Robert Langston, a man admired for his work in the community. His black headstone gleamed under the sun, engraved with the words "A Life of Service." Among the mourners stood an elderly woman in a modest green dress, her silver hair tucked beneath a simple hat. She held a single red rose, her eyes reflecting a deeper sorrow than the rest. She had stood quietly, unnoticed by most. It wasn't until the pastor's final prayer ended that she stepped forward. The soft crunch of gravel under her shoes was the only sound as the mourners parted for her. When she reached the grave, she gently placed the rose atop the casket. Turning to the crowd, she began, "My name is Clara Johnson. I doubt many of you know me, but I knew Robert better than anyone here." A ripple of surprise swept through the crowd. Faces turned, whispers of curiosity filled the air. Who was this woman? How could she claim to know him so well? Clara's gaze held firm as she said, "Before this day ends, you'll understand why I'm here and why Robert's story isn't what you think." Her words lingered in the air like a quiet challenge. Clara's voice, calm yet filled with authority, commanded the crowd's attention. "I met Robert 50 years ago," she began, her voice dipping into memories. "It wasn't in this town. It was in Birmingham, Alabama, during a time when people like me weren't welcome in places like this. Robert was a young man then, full of fire. He worked as a teacher, but his heart was in the fight for civil rights. That's where our paths crossed, on the steps of a church, organizing sit-ins. He stood beside me, even when it cost him everything." Gasps rippled through the group. The Robert they knew was kind and generous, but this story of his past was unknown to them. Clara continued, "We weren't just comrades in that struggle. We became family. He was there when I lost my brother to violence, and I stood by him when he was disowned by his own." Her hand trembled as she looked at the casket. "He called me his sister in every way that mattered, even when it wasn't safe for him to say it out loud." The crowd grew uneasy, hearing about the untold side of Robert's life. But I'm not here just to talk about the past. It's about the man he became because of those sacrifices. She paused, letting the silence deepen. Clara's next words revealed even more. In 1967, Robert lost his job for attending a march in Selma. He didn't tell anyone here. He moved to a small house and scraped by on tutoring jobs. He never stopped fighting for what was right. Her voice cracked as she shared another memory. "When my home was attacked for hosting meetings, Robert was the one who came in the dead of night, risking everything to take me and my family to safety." She turned back to the casket, her words hanging in the heavy silence. Softening, Clara said, "That's who Robert was. Not the polished man in the suit most of you remember, but someone who walked through fire for the people he cared about." The crowd stood in silence, captivated as she pulled out a folded piece of paper from her purse. "This," she held it up, "is a letter Robert wrote to me in 1972. I'll read a small part to you." Clara carefully unfolded the letter, her hands shaking just enough to show how much it meant. She began reading, her voice trembling but steady. "Clara, You're the sister I chose when life gave me none. We've carried burdens no one should, but I'd carry them again for you without question. You remind me daily that love isn't about blood. It's about who stands by your side when the world turns its back. Her voice broke on the last line. She paused, gathering herself. The crowd, one still, began to shift, some dabbing at their eyes, others staring at the ground, perhaps feeling regret for not knowing the side of the man they had come to honor. Clara folded the letter. Robert never turned his back on anyone, she said, even when it cost him everything. But how many of you knew this? How many even cared to ask? Her words hung in the air, heavy and filled with truth. As the crowd began to grasp Robert's sacrifices, Clara revealed something even more profound. The truth is, she said, her voice steady but laced with sorrow, there's more to Robert than you ever knew. He wasn't just fighting for others. He was fighting a battle no one saw. For years, he supported a son he couldn't openly acknowledge because of who the mother was. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Clara's eyes scanned the stunned faces, but she pressed on. His son, Daniel, was born to a woman Robert couldn't marry because of the time and place they lived in. The boy was black, like me, and Robert had to keep it hidden for fear of what it would do to his career and reputation. Whispers started, but Clara wasn't done. I was there when Daniel was born, she said quietly. Robert made sure that boy never went without. He paid for his schooling, wrote letters every week, and visited whenever he could under cover of night. He made sure Daniel had everything he never had growing up, a father's love, even if it had to be a quiet one. Tears welled in her eyes, but her voice remained strong. And Daniel, the man you never knew existed, is here today. A tall man stepped forward from the back of the crowd, his presence commanding, with broad shoulders and quiet dignity in his movements. His resemblance to Robert was undeniable. The crowd turned to look, stunned into silence. Daniel walked up to Clara, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Clara smiled at him through her tears. "It was always my honor." She turned back to the crowd. Robert loved you all, in his own way, but his deepest love was for the people he fought for, those of us who didn't have the luxury of being seen in polite society. That's why I'm here today, to make sure you know the real man behind the accolades. The silence that followed wasn't just shock, it was reflection. The group stood, each person processing the truth that had been hidden in plain sight. But Clara had one final story to share, one last act of courage that would define Robert's legacy. The weight of her words settled over the group like a heavy fog. The murmurs faded into an uneasy stillness. All eyes were on Daniel, who stood tall beside Clara, his presence a living testament to the secret Robert had carried. An older man near the front cleared his throat, breaking the silence. I never knew," he stammered. Robert never said a word about any of this. Clara's expression softened as she looked at him. He wasn't the kind of man to seek praise for doing what was right, she replied gently. But make no mistake, he carried the weight of those sacrifices every single day. A middle-aged woman, her face streaked with tears, hesitantly stepped forward. "I remember him helping my family when my father lost his job," she said quietly. "I thought I understood his kindness, but now it feels so much deeper." Clara nodded, her voice steady but filled with emotion. Robert didn't just give out of convenience. He gave because he knew what it meant to go without, and he never wanted anyone to feel that same pain. The group began to stir, fragments of their own memories of Robert surfacing. Each story they shared painted a picture of a man whose generosity came from a life most of them had never known. None of them truly understood, but it wasn't just the memories lingering in the air. It was the guilt. They realized they only knew the polished version of Robert Langston, the man who hid his struggles behind his success. A young man spoke up, "It's not fair." He deserved to be celebrated for everything. Clara turned to him. "You're right." But Robert never cared about credit. His greatest legacy isn't in awards. It's in the lives he touched. Yours, mine, and Marcus's. Marcus stepped forward. My father always said a person's true measure is in the people they impact. Today, I see he left behind more than I ever imagined. Clara paused before sharing one final story. 2 months before Robert passed, he called me. He wasn't well, but he was setting up a trust. Not for himself, but for the children in this community who need opportunities. Marcus added, "The trust is real. It's already set up, providing scholarships and mentorship for kids in need." My father wanted his life to mean something, not just for those who knew him, but for future generations. Clara looked around. That was Robert's greatest gift. He didn't seek recognition. He just made the world better. She paused, her voice firm. "So now, I leave you with this. How will you be remembered?" The crowd exhaled, reflecting. Clara gave a final nod to Marcus. As they began to leave, many approached Clara and Marcus, promising to honor Robert's legacy. If this story touched you, remember, acts of kindness and sacrifice often go unseen, but they never go unnoticed. Live a life that leaves a lasting impact on others. Like, share, and subscribe to continue sharing meaningful stories like this one.